Retro.
Hi, this is Vanessa Marshall, voice of Hera and Rook Cast, and you're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. Their behavior is continually unexpected.
Hello there. Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And we are starting the week, as we have been doing lately, with another episode of the Clone Wars as we get through our rewatch. Jay, you want to go ahead and give everyone our social media contacts before we get started?
Sure. And that was a great Obi-Wan impression, by the way.
Thank you.
We are on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust.
All right. The dish is aligned. The signal's boosted to maximum output. The shield's down. We're now broadcasting to the galaxy. This will be our discussion of episode 6 from season 2 of the Clone Wars, again, called Weapons Factory. You want to kick us off with the summary of this episode, please?
Sure will. After successfully landing their forces on Geonosis, the Jedi and the clones begin the next step of their invasion of the Separatist world. Their target is Poggle the Lesser's new droid factory. The factory's location beyond a canyon presents a strategic challenge for an attack. Therefore, Ahsoka teams up with Barriss Offee, the Padawan to Master Luminara, to infiltrate the base and blow it up from the inside. The Separatists have a trick up their sleeve, though, and they unleash nearly invulnerable tanks on the Republic forces. After the Geonosians steal Ahsoka and Barriss's bombs, they commandeer a tank and blow up the factory from the inside, which buries them under a mountain of debris. Before they can suffocate, Anakin and Luminara locate and rescue them.
Right. So another classic episode of the Clone Wars. What did you think about this one overall?
Again, just so good to revisit all of these. And for me, the big exclamation point on this is just the master-Padawan relationships between Anakin and Ahsoka, and then Luminara and Barriss, and just how incredibly different they are, not only in the way that they approach things, but also in just their attachment, which I hate to use that word, to each other. And, the fortune cookie at the very beginning just says it all, as far as the trust being a gift kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I forget the exact wording of that, but there's a lot of trust going on in this episode. But again, lots of action, lots of great, lighting, lots of great animation, world building, all the things. So it's a really great episode.
Yeah, definitely so. I like this one as well. It is another episode of the mini that feature the Anakin and Ahsoka relationship and them kind of figuring out how to be master and Padawan through all of this. There's a few things that made me laugh about their relationship and things that they say to each other, like in all seriousness, which are not true. But we'll get to at least one of those as we get through this episode. But again, it starts off with Ahsoka giving a briefing to the clones about this droid factory and what they're going to have to do to blow it up. And Anakin keeps interrupting, and it's almost like he doesn't realize that he's interrupting in this case. And when the briefing is finally over, she confronts him, which I really commend her for. That's hard for, I think, in a mentor-mentee relationship for a lot of mentees to do. And she kind of takes it a little hard. She's like, she accuses him of not trusting her in this one, but he proclaims that that's not the case. What do you think about this? I don't know necessarily call it a fight, but this disagreement that they're having.
Well, of course, their relationship has always been very unorthodox from the very beginning. And, I think about Anakin's relationship with Obi-Wan, and I think about him in Attack of the Clones and saying that, about Obi-Wan being overly critical and he's holding him back, and all of these things. And then here's Anakin just kind of stepping in, almost not really doing the same thing to Ahsoka, but to your point, she did something that Anakin never would have, in that she called him out on it, in terms of what he was doing, and not giving her the chance to go over her briefing, where I don't think Anakin would have done that to Obi-Wan. If Obi-Wan would have done the same thing to Anakin and interrupted him during a briefing, he probably would have just stayed silent about the whole thing.
I think he would have thrown a tantrum when it was all said and done.
Yeah, maybe not to Obi-Wan, but to somebody else.
Yeah, at some point he would have thrown a tantrum, yeah, on this situation. But right, that's a good clarification on your part. One of the things that comes up over the course of this episode, and I can't remember exactly where it happens, is that she protests to him about how she follows orders. And I was like, really, Ahsoka? Have you paid attention to yourself from the past half dozen episodes of this series?
Exactly.
Because, I mean, it was with Storm over Ryloth episode. I think that's what it's called. They're invading Ryloth, and she takes her squadron, and she won't turn around when they give her orders. Or when they're on Felucia, and they order her to rendezvous with them because they're leaving the planet, and she nearly gets overrun by battle droids. Or when they're trying to track down Cad Bane, and Ahsoka tells her to wait, that they'll take on Cad Bane together, and she rushes off and tries to find him on her own. So she might have the intention to follow orders, but the actual following the orders doesn't always happen for her when it comes down to that. And so I am not saying that Anakin's dispute with her in this episode is because she doesn't follow orders, because let's face it, he's rebellious in that way too. But you said you didn't want to necessarily use the attachment word. I want to use the attachment word. And we see this quite a bit in this episode with him. There is an attachment that he's formed with Ahsoka. He recognizes her as his responsibility. He doesn't want anything to happen to her. He's taking seriously that he has to train her. And I don't think he's confident in himself that he's trained her to where she needs to be in this episode to do these type of things, that he's not ready to let her leave the nest, so to speak, and learn how to fly on her own.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think that's typical of any parent. I mean, think about ourselves with our own kids, and we hope that we've given them what they need, but when the time comes, we never truly see it. And sometimes when we do, we are both awed and also kind of saddened, not really saddened, but just like, oh, they didn't need me after all, kind of thing. It's very bittersweet in that way. And so, I mean, Ahsoka was just all about, well, my master taught me this and this and this and this. And she was very confident. And I think that moment is actually really pivotal, and something that she needed to be able to show Barriss that she could do, and that this was the kind of relationship that they had. And there's such a difference between Barriss and Luminara, in contrast to all of these things. I mean, Barriss was even resigned to dying there. I mean, and which they were doing that for the mission anyways, but she was basically giving up, and Ahsoka's like, nope. And then she was talking about, I don't want to starve down here. And Ahsoka's like, don't worry, like you'll run out of water, before we starve, and then and we'll die of that anyways. It's like, or air. We're gonna run out of air. That's what it was. But she never lost hope. And Anakin never lost hope in Ahsoka either. And he was very frustrated with Luminara. And Luminara's just all like Yoda, like, oh, it's okay. We have to let them go. And Anakin's like, no, we don't. There's a chance that they're down there. We're going to save them.
Okay, yeah, you brought up a whole bunch of topics that I think we need to address here. And so it's a good outline for the rest of this discussion here. One, no, that's good. I mean, it's hard to isolate any one of these topics because they're all interrelated in this. So first off, Barriss gets introduced into the Clone Wars here. This is her first appearance in all of this. One of the things that struck me on this is that, I am so used to seeing Jedi masters and apprentices in this show. And human and human is like the only common relationship we ever get of like same species master Padawan in the Clone Wars. And now we have Miriel and Mirialan.
Right.
And that just, I don't know why, but the first time that just jumped out at me, because it's typically You've got Anakin and Ahsoka, human and Togruta, but I can't think of any Togruta pairing.
Mhm.
Or, you go to the High Republic, and you might get humans pairing up, but frequently it's, a Twi'lek and a human, or a human and a Wookiee, or whatever, or Wookiee and human as master and apprentice. We see all that type of stuff, but you rarely. I can't think of any other off the top of my head master apprentice arrangement other than human that we've seen other than these two here,
That's a good
with
point.
Luminara and Barriss Offee. So it's
Right.
probably over emphasizing that, but it is what it is.
No, I don't think it's overemphasizing at all because there's some cultural things I think even though the Jedi expect them to act and react in certain ways that just being both, Mary Ellen speaks to a different level of maybe relationship for them.
Right. The other thing that occurred to me is, I think Luminara and Barriss Offee in this episode were a deliberate choice so they can be juxtaposed against Anakin and Ahsoka. Luminara is a very traditional Jedi, as far as I know. She was found as an infant, as a baby, brought into the Jedi Order, raised and trained. And then Barriss Offee, found as a baby, brought into the Order, raised and trained, and apprenticed to a Jedi Master. Meanwhile, you get Anakin, who was 9 at the time he was found, developed an entire life and set of skills separate from the Jedi Order that made him very resourceful, that made him very savvy on what to do with such, he learned, I don't want to call them necessarily smuggler's tricks, but he learned how to survive on Tatooine, scavenging, how to
Mhm.
build things, and how to do things outside the normal training of the Jedi Order. And he brought that with him to the temple, and he's passing that off to Ahsoka in this case.
Right.
I mean, those two might have been the only ones that would have thought about that trick that she pulled to signal Anakin at the end of this episode when they were trapped under that debris. And not to necessarily say that the other Jedi way is wrong, but it just kind of shows you that the Jedi are very homogenous in that way, with them all learning the same sets of skills. There's not a whole lot of variety between them, even if they are from different species, because they all get brought up in the same tradition that way.
Mhm. Mhm. No, those are some good points. And, when you're talking about Ahsoka, you're right. I mean, she's pushed to think quickly, make bold decisions, and just do things that she has to do. And whereas Barris is a lot more, kind of inward contemplation and calm and composed and measured, which is definitely from the teachings of Luminara. And even when she introduced herself to Ahsoka, she bows to Ahsoka and she's
Yeah.
like, I'm Padawan Barriss Offee, at your service. And it's like, Ahsoka's like, and I'm Ahsoka,
Yeah.
kind of like
Just
we're
takes
both
her
on the
hand and helps her
same.
stand
Yeah.
up. Yeah.
It's like we're both Padawans. Like, why are you doing this? It's fine. Get up.
Well, and the other thing it is like Ahsoka is doing her best to make Anakin proud and all this. I
Hmm.
think that's part of the reason why she's protesting. It's you know, she's outwardly saying, "You don't trust me. I got this. I can do this." And we're talking about Anakin and his attachment, and not wanting to let her go and do that type of thing. But really, when it comes down to it, Ahsoka is just trying to impress him, whereas Barriss, it's understated, but I think she's trying to impress everybody.
Hmm.
She's also trying to make Luminara proud. Like, look how proper I'm being, with the bow and the way she talks and how proper she is throughout this whole episode. And
Right.
she and Luminara are diehard adherents and believers in the Force. That's not to say Anakin and Ahsoka aren't either, but they much more like, we got other skills, we got other things we can fall back on. Just because we can't think of how to get out from underneath this debris, it doesn't mean that that's necessarily the will of the Force. we
Hmm.
we have other options here that we can try before we give in and decide, oh, this is where the Force wanted us to be on
Right.
this.
Right.
And I think that aspect of Anakin's training for Ahsoka serves her well in the
Oh
long
yeah.
run, compared to a lot of other Jedi.
Oh, I totally agree. And, for all four of these Jedi, they're all being tested in their own ways too, not just as warriors, but, as individuals, they're being forced to grow in ways that they never really even expected to have to grow. I mean, as far as Barriss trusting Ahsoka, and then I think for Barriss too, just jumping ahead, seeing how Luminara reacted when they came out of there, and she says to Ahsoka, your master never gave up on you. Well, it was like, well, are you saying you gave up on me? Is like,
Mhm.
what the heck's Barriss thinking here? So maybe this is actually sowing the seeds for her future struggles, with the Jedi code. But
Yeah, the precise line is your master never lost faith
that's what
in
it
you.
was. Your master never
Right.
never lost faith in you.
And I don't know that it was that Luminara had lost faith in Barriss in this. I took it as that she saw what was going on between those two. And it was an observation. I mean, it was plain. They were arguing when she and Barriss walked up, two of them. And, and she overheard some of the things that they were saying to each
Mhm.
other. And, it was a gentle, kind word that she could put in there that built a bridge between repaired a bridge, which is ironic because the bridge just got blown up
Right.
right before that. But the other thing is that, there was this whole business here about, Anakin is very frustrated. He's very agitated after Ahsoka has sent the message saying, sorry, we can't make it out. And so they trigger they commandeer that tank and they use it to blow up the reactor, which destroys the weapons factory. And Anakin kind of panics in that moment. And then, meanwhile, and goes back to what I was saying about the hardcore belief in the Force. Luminara is like, this is the will of the Force. And then later when they find him, Ahsoka sends that coded message over her comm after they all synchronize their watches, which is funny. We'll just address that in a second. But Anakin's like, see, I told you that they were alive. And Luminar's response is like, I have faith in my Padawan. I can't remember exactly what she says, but I'm prepared to let her go when the time comes.
When the
Are
time
you?
comes. Mhm.
And the thing is like that brings up this whole attachment again on this. And it got me thinking, and I don't want to have this whole episode derail into a discussion of attachment. I don't know if you sat the Jedi down and asked them, it's like, because Anakin even says this in Attack of Clones, like, compassion is encouraged. So you can say we're encouraged to love when it
Mhm.
comes down to it. It is it's the type of attachment in this case, because for Anakin, it becomes a very jealous attachment. It's like something was going to happen to Padme. Oh my God, I can't let that happen. And I will do anything to make sure it doesn't, even if that means turning on the Jedi and slaughtering all of them so I can learn the secrets to keep her from dying. In this case, he was prepared to do something reckless
Mhm.
to save Ahsoka. And, it was her own skills that helped resolve that issue here. And, meanwhile, I don't think Luminara lost any faith in Barriss, but she was not going to let her attachment to her Padawan take control of her emotions and let those emotions take control of her.
Mhm. No, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
And there is a
But,
difference there for sure.
uh-huh. Yeah. But like I said, that just again, they go out of their way to paint this picture of Anakin for us
Right,
time and
it's
time
true.
again, whether it's Padme finding herself in some sort of danger or Ahsoka ending up in trouble or danger. And I on the one hand, he's to be commended that he is going to fight for them, but on the other hand, the lengths that he'll go to do so is
Sure.
not safe.
It's true, whether it's Ahsoka or R2-D2 or whatever, but, for Anakin, attachment is a human emotion,
Sure.
whereas for the rest of the Jedi, attachment is kind of a dangerous thing, so I think that's where the difference there
Well, it was
lies.
very dangerous for for Anakin as well, when it was all said and
Mhm.
done.
It's
Um,
true.
what did you think about Anakin saying to her, "I never doubted you for a second on that." And I mean, do you believe him? Is that true?
I actually do, and I think that, there's a lot of guff that he gives to Ahsoka, and calling her snips and, again, like, stepping over her in her briefing and whatnot, but I really think that when it comes right down to it, he sees in Ahsoka maybe even more than what he saw in himself at that age in a lot of ways, and, it's kinda like what Yoda said, "We are what they grow beyond," so I really kinda do believe that he believed that. What do you think?
Well, I'm having a hard time reconciling it because, at the beginning of this episode, he flat out says that she wasn't prepared for this.
Mhm.
And now at the end, he's saying, "I never doubted you for a second." I was like, "Well, you did at the very beginning of this episode. You
Mhm.
said you said you weren't prepared on all of this." Now, could he have put that doubt aside as soon as she ran off on the mission? Because what choice did he have? Sure, on all that. But it's interesting. I can't. These episodes sometimes make me think, "Wow, these two are perfect for each other as master and apprentice." And then there's other times that I like that little bit of doubt creeps into my mind. Like, was Anakin really prepared to be a Jedi master? A master to an apprentice at this phase?
Right.
And and maybe the answer to that is no, he was not. But it helped him grow up, or that
Right.
was the goal. And because that was a deliberate pairing that Yoda put together.
Yeah, exactly. Because I mean,
So,
if you think about it from an age standpoint,
mhm.
isn't Anakin, like, just about 20 at this point? Because I think
Yeah.
he might have just been turning 20, because I think he was 19 when he married Padme. And
Mhm.
so, this would be very soon after that, and, I mean, we don't know. Do we actually know when his birthday is? Like, what his actual birthday is? I'm just curious.
I have no idea.
Yeah,
It's
that's a
I'm
very
sure
interesting, I just
Wikipedia
thought of that.
yeah, I think Wikipedia and the likes only can give you the year that you can never, like
Yeah,
or I have no
right,
idea what the Star Wars months are now that you mentioned it. I'm sure it's
right,
not January,
yeah,
February, March, etcetera, but,
right, and
um,
every planet has a different, like, cycle kind of thing, depending on how many standard days there are in their calendar year
yeah.
rotation and whatnot, but anyway. But yeah, I
Alright.
was thinking about that today too with, Anakin, and Obi-Wan's not even featured in this episode, but essentially, Ahsoka is Obi-Wan's grand Padawan. So I often wonder what he thinks of all of their antics as well, watching, like, your own child father and or mother their own child, you know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, there's no secret that Obi-Wan enjoys his friends. When it comes down to it, he handles the loss a lot better than Anakin does when that
Mhm.
happens. But you can tell he's always, yeah, and he says so in Revenge of the Sith, how proud he was of Anakin. And I am sure along the way he worked with Ahsoka all the time.
Right.
Those were the big three of the Clone Wars,
Mhm.
and so he was proud of her too. But in this type of situation, he probably would have been yelling at Anakin the same way he did in Attack of the Clones. When Padme fell out of the ship, out of the gunship, it's like,
Right.
come to your senses, she's, what would you
Right.
think she'd do in your position? She'd do that type of thing. So, all right. We focused for 20 minutes on Anakin and Ahsoka here. That's not all that happens in this episode.
That's true.
There's quite a bit of action. So in the last 7 or 8 that we got here, let's kind of focus on a few other things before we wrap it up here. These super tanks. What do you think about those?
Yeah, I mean, they were definitely, impenetrable to just about everything. And I'm assuming that these were the only prototypes that they had, because we don't see these again,
Right.
correct? So
Yeah.
they were
They
just gone on
only
the
had
bridge
made,
and that was it.
yeah, so many at this foundry. And then
Mhm.
the foundry got blown up.
Right.
And Anakin and Luminara did that monkey bars crawl underneath the bridge to plant all those bombs to destroy the ones that they had already built.
And I have
So,
to say that made me very nervous, even though I knew I was watching an animated show and I knew everybody was gonna make it out of there alive. There's just something about that, and we've seen a lot of people perish off of bridges and down chasms and such. So it kind of made me very nervous. But speaking of the tanks and the foundry and everything, I saw that this was in our notes that you put in here. I think it's probably good to mention that because Luminar had memorized every juncture in the foundry, that this is the foundry that Padme stole the plans for. And I
it
think that's
has to be,
correct. Yeah.
because how else would she have known? How would else she have been able to study those plans?
Right.
And they never explicitly state so, but this is something we've been talking about for a few weeks since the
Hmm.
Senate spy episode. Is like, is this the point? Or is this the very foundry that they're going to go attack on Geonosis? And yeah, I mean, I can't think of it. I mean, unless they had a spy land on Geonosis ahead of them and somehow run through the entire catacombs, and
Hmm.
that doesn't make any sense.
Mm-mm.
Uh, so yeah, I feel like this has to be that one.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah. I got a kick out of the tactical droid, especially when it was gloating after it had Barriss and Ahsoka trapped there by the reactor
Oh
for the thing,
yeah.
and then the bomb right next to it blows up and destroys it.
Yep.
It's a fun moment there.
Yep, and I thought it was a nice touch that they had some Geonosian, like, bug drawings on him as well. If you
Uh-huh.
notice that, he had on his head, it almost looked like a Geonosian, with the wings and everything, and then there were some other symbols on his plated armor in the front too, which I thought was cool.
Yeah. And the catacombs with all the sleeping Geonosians in them. And just that moment when Ahsoka and Luminara are sneaking through there, and the one sleeping Geonosian kind of rolls over and his hand lands directly on top of Barriss's head.
Creepy.
And she just kind of pauses there. It's like, Ahsoka, Ahsoka, whispering. And Ahsoka comes back and gently lifts the hand up. I mean, like, yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, you're just seconds away from that guy waking up and blowing the whole thing.
Mhm, and then he does kind of peek an eye open, like, just as they get out the other side too. But I have to say, I don't know why Ahsoka physically touched that Geonosian. Like, I was thinking, "Why wouldn't you just use the Force? Then you wouldn't have had to touch him." But maybe he would have been more inclined to notice that question mark? I don't know.
Is this because you wouldn't want to touch a bug, or because you just
Maybe. No, bugs generally don't gross me out or creep me out, but something about these catacombs and all of these sleeping bugs in there just kind of do, because they remind me a lot of just like termites,
Uh-huh.
and termites just freak me out in general. I don't like termites.
Oh, yeah. Well, and the Geonosians are always a little bit creepy. I mean, they're the kind of the evolution of the the battle droid as far as an enemy goes. They
Mhm.
all look alike, so in that way they're faceless. You know, the battle droids are literally faceless, but they are all like practically identical, kind of goofy. These guys aren't goofy; they're just creepy on here.
Right.
And they, you know, you and there's so many of them. You take out one and three or four replace them, and then you just think back to like Attack of the Clones when Padme and Anakin are wandering through the catacombs of the droid factory that they infiltrate there, and all of a sudden they realize that they're surrounded by Geonosians, and they all just kind of come swarming. And Anakin is just swatting them away with his lightsaber. You can quickly get overrun by these things. Uh,
Mhm.
Not to mention the landing at Point Rain episode we just discussed last week. You know, these guys would swoop down and carry people off, and they
Yes.
did that with Ahsoka at one point in this episode.
Oh, that's
So
right. They did.
yeah, the Geonosians are they never completely get their due, kind of like the battle droids over the course of the series, but this one made them creepy.
Yes, agreed.
Hmm. All right, I think we've covered most of this episode. Is there anything else you want to touch on before we wrap it up?
Oh, just the whole, the clones and the way that they were battling through this whole thing. And I was just watching a lot more in the background on some of the shots, and just the way that Rex was able to keep the team in line and just, get them to do what they needed to do. But I was watching a lot of the clones in the background, and there's so much great touches in the animation that I think can easily go unnoticed.
Hmm.
But I was really trying to pay attention to some of that. And the lighting in this episode, I mean, we've talked about that several times. And even the camera angles. Like, I noticed the way that, especially when Anakin and Ahsoka were talking to one another, it almost looked like the camera was like panning in different ways. But yet you're watching an animated show. So I just really appreciate those little touches.
Indeed, indeed. Yeah, it's a good episode. I mean, it's not one of my favorites necessarily, but this is one of the episodes that people tend to remember.
Hmm.
And again, a lot because of the Anakin Ahsoka dynamic that we've got going on there. I mean, Landing Point Rain is just such an intense episode that it's a hard follow up. Oh, one last thing that I'll remark on is the featurette for this episode that Dave Filoni did was all about the entrance that Barriss carved into the base of the canyon to get into the catacombs, and how it was like this perfect rectangle.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I don't know if you had a chance to watch that featurette, but he was going on. I was like, he always wanted to have a scene where the Jedi were at the temple training the younglings on how to cut shapes into things. And because he'd been wondering, it's like, why is it they always do like circles? And do you know how hard it is to make a perfect circle? And while he was talking about that, they featured from last season, I think it was the Duel of the Droids episode where Ahsoka comes out of the vent after she carved like a perfect circle in the vent with her lightsaber.
Oh,
And
yeah.
and he was going on, I was like, and if you think about it, he says, it'd be so much more efficient to make a square because it'd be easier to get in and out of. And
True.
it was the goofiest little 2 minutes of him just kind of talking about Jedi teaching their Padawans on how to cut shapes and massive pieces of stone or metal or whatever. But I was
I can
kind of hoping to hear
imagine.
him talk a bit more about the Anakin Ahsoka relationship, but I guess he's probably done that enough on those featurettes that he decided to have a little fun with this one.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true. Yeah, I could just see that little
Well, definitely.
temple training.
Yeah. Go check that out if you haven't done so. It's a fun little watch over on StarWars.com.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us in this episode of Podcast Stardust and our discussion of Weapons Factory. We hope you've enjoyed it. And if you want to get more of our discussions of the Clone Wars as we work through our rewatch, then make sure you subscribe to this show. On that note, though, we've only got a couple more weeks before Andor Season 2 starts and Tales of the Underworld. So we'll be probably taking all of May off from covering the Clone Wars so we can fit that into our schedule. But we will be
Mhm.
getting back into the Clone Wars after that happens as we continue to progress through Season 2. And so, yeah, make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you can get all those episodes. You know how to do that on your podcatcher of choice. You found us, so I'm assuming you know how to subscribe as well. Once you've done that, we'd appreciate it if you would rate and review the show. That helps others find us. And then if you want to find more Podcast Stardust and everything we've done for the past going on 5.5 years, Jay,
Yeah.
then head over to RutchersApp.com. That'll get you more than the 100 or 200 episodes that are likely to be on your podcatcher. And, that gets all of our monthly movie discussions as we go through our movie of the year, all of Jay's World Between Worlds segments, everything we've done covering Rebels and other shows, our coverage of Mandalorian, the Book of Boba Fett, Ahsoka, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Season 1 of Andor. It's all there on RutchersApp.com. Great place to find all of that. Jay, you want to go ahead and remind everybody what our social media contacts are and the other places we can be located online?
Absolutely. And just to expand on what you said, it's really easy to find us and subscribe to all of the things. And so we're on Facebook and Instagram on our socials at Podcast Stardust. And we also have our Pinterest boards that has lots and lots of different kinds of ideas for everything Star Wars. So head over there. And then, as Dennis was mentioning, you can find us on all kinds of different platforms. And two of those include YouTube as well as YouTube Music, which also subscribe, like, and to support the show, you can also interact with us on those as well. And we would love to see it and hear it. And then we also have our T Public store where you can support the show by picking up one of 7 different show logo designs available on all kinds of things from t-shirts and sweatshirts to home goods and pretty much everything in between. So if you're interested in that, you can hit up the link to that in our show notes.
All right. So you want to remind everybody what you're doing in cosplay?
Sure. So as always, you can catch me on my Instagram, which is at j.snipscosplay. And right now, month of April is actually a little slow, taking some time off, but May is definitely going to be amping up. But in the meantime, you can catch me as Ahsoka, the fourth sister Inquisitor, as well as 2 different versions of Hera and my original concept Mandalorian, as well as some other fun things sprinkled in here and there. And so as May starts to approach, I will update everybody on the appearances and the different types of things that I'll be up to and where you can find me in May. But until then, once again, at j.snipscosplay.
All right. Upcoming on the show this Wednesday, Jay is treating us to another edition of World Between Worlds, where she rounds up Star Wars lifestyle and fashion products. And then on Friday, we end the week with another look at Star Wars news. I'm hoping it'll be exciting as last week, but I kind of doubt it. We'll see. But with that said, thanks for listening to episode 807 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great week. And until next time, may the Force be